So we'll begin today's session. Sit comfortably wherever you are. Keep the back and neck straight. And when you feel ready, very gently close your eyes. Just start observing your breath. Watch the natural flow of your breathing as you inhale and as you exhale. Gently shift your attention to the body. Become aware of your posture. Check your alignment and see if you need to make any adjustments. If you do, take this time. Correct your posture. Now gently bring your attention back to your breathing and begin to deepen each and every breath. Slow, long and deep inhalations. Slow, long and deep exhalations. Allow your breathing and your mind to relax. We will open today's session by chanting Om 3 times, followed by the Guru Mantra. Take a deep inhalation for Om. Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Parabrahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Gurave Namaha. Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Take a deep breath in for Om. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Observe your breathing and feel the vibrations. Now join both the palms together. Begin to rub both your palms. Place your palms on your eyes. Very slowly, while blinking and looking at the palms, begin to open up the eyes, coming back with a big smile on your face. Om Shanti. Namaste to everyone. So let us begin our session for today, right? So in last class we have talked about what yoga is. We have deeply explored the meaning of yoga, and now you guys get a little bit of hint, right, that it's not just the practice of asana or just the practice of pranayama. It is much more than that, and it has a lot of other practices as well, right? And these all form processes of yoga. So what yoga actually is, the final point, right? So now the next question that comes up in the mind is, from where did this come, right? Because okay, yoga is there, right? But the curiosity arises that from where did this, like, why did this come in the first place, right? Even you guys, you could have gone for any Zumba class, dancing class, right? Those are much more entertaining, right? Your mind would be more engaged in those classes. But you chose to come in yoga, in the practice of yoga, right? So you would also have some thought behind coming into yogic practices, be it for your profession or for your personal growth, it doesn't matter, right? But for some reason you chose yoga, right? So of course there is a proper reasoning behind the origin of yoga, and today we are going to explore this meaning more deeply. Okay, so why did yoga originate? For this there are two answers that we have, right? So it depends on you, whichever one you want to believe, you can go ahead and choose that one, right? So first is the psychological reasoning, right? So pertaining to the nature of the human being, right? And the second one is the mythological origin, and that has to do more with your own set of belief systems. Do you believe in the existence of certain gods or not? So it's totally up to you, whichever reasoning helps you to understand the origin better. That reasoning you can choose, and that can become a factor which keeps you motivated to do your practice basically, right? So let's come to the psychological reasoning for the origination of yoga. This is further subdivided into two parts, right? The first part is called Sukha Pravarti and Dukh Nivritti. So this is one only, these two reasonings are together, right? So let's just write down the spellings first, and then I will explain deeply what they mean, right? So Sukha Pravarti. So Sukha is S-U-K-H-A. Sukha, right? Sukha Pravarti, P-R-A-V-R-I-T-T-I. Sukha Pravarti, right? And then you can write down, and the thing attached with this is also Dukha Nivritti, D-U-K-H-A, Dukha Nivritti, N-I-V-R-I-T-T-I, Dukha Nivritti, right? Now, along with Sukha Pravarti or above that, you can write down in brackets, what does this term actually mean in English? What is the translation? So, the translation for this is enhancement of happiness, right? And on the other side, Dukha Nivritti is the eradication or lessening of the suffering. Okay, so this is the first reason. The second reason that comes under the psychological reasoning only, right? So first we divided the origin into two parts, the psychological and mythological. Now in psychological we are further subdividing it into two parts. One is your Sukha Pravarti, Dukha Nivritti, and second one is curiosity, okay? So you can present this information as you want to present it, which like as it is easy for you to perceive, right? So let's come to the psychological origin only. So there were certain things, if you are a believer, if you are a non-believer in God, it doesn't matter. There are certain things that are generally seen as the realities of life only, right? So when philosophers were deeply studying the nature of human life, of the environment around them, they came to certain conclusions, right? Like, there are certain facts that we come across, right? So like that, there were certain facts and certain reasonings that were remaining the same no matter whose life is discussed, right? So one of such truths which actually drove us to look for a practice like yoga was the existence of suffering, right? So most of us, in most of the times in our lives, we see that the happiness comes and it goes away, right? But this sense of suffering not meaning that it's something very painful, right? It could show up in the form of physical pain, right? Then it could also show up in the form of some negative thoughts or emotions, and it can also show up in multiple other forms, right? So this suffering, somehow, even though the happiness was coming and going again and again, this suffering remained to be a very important part, or this was a part which could not be removed, basically. So even though the happiness was coming and going, the suffering seemed to be a constant, basically. And philosophers were deeply observing this thing, right? And they observed that no matter what you do, you are unable to attain a permanent source of happiness, but permanent source of sadness is a default, right? So most of you, in fact all of you, the common factor why you are sitting over here attending these classes is because there is some level of suffering in your own lives, right? And if you actually think about it, very rarely we become free of this suffering or sadness that is there in life, right? So yoga as a practice developed out of this need of humanity, right? They wanted to find a more permanent source for happiness, right? And such kind of happiness which stays, right? So you will see the word bliss being used, right? So bliss is something which is like there, right? Happiness will come and go, right? But Bliss, when you say the term bliss, it has a very different meaning to it, right? It has a very different sound to it. So they wanted to shift from happiness to bliss, basically, something more permanent, right? And in order to look for this, the practices of yoga were developed, because it was seen that through certain practices, so your anger, hatred, jealousy, what are these? These are impurities of the mind, right? The mind becomes impure, and then these defilements, they begin to come up, right? So if you look at yogic practices, they are doing the cleansing on a lot of levels, right? So suppose Shat Karma, it is doing the cleansing on the physical level. Asana, again doing the cleansing on the physical level mostly. Then when you move to pranayam, it's cleansing you to another level, right, which is more subtle. And like this, all the other practices, they are taking you towards more subtle cleansing of yourself, right? So these practices were seen as a way of cleaning the impurities of the mind, and as a consequence of this cleansing, right, it was believed that if this cleansing takes place, right, then one will be able to come to a much more permanent source of happiness. Now when something happens, if I am not generating a negative emotion like anger, right, so I am mostly in a state of bliss only, right? I'm not saying that go too much into happiness also, that should not be a target, but just the general cleansing and coming to a very neutral state, right, coming to a very calming state. And yoga was seen as that practice, right? So first reason for the development of yoga is that one wanted to enhance the happiness, and not only enhancing the happiness, they also wanted to eradicate the suffering at the same time. So like I said, the cleansing, right? When you do the cleansing, what you are doing is actually coming out of this, suffering, right? So both of them combined together. If my focus is just to increase the happiness, maybe that level of sadness will also follow me, right? So first reason which became was, we want to look for a practice which can increase our level of current happiness, which can come in the form of a better health, a better breathing pattern, right? And then at the same time, also what we want to do is reduce the sadness, right? So this gap, we want to increase this gap, and we want to be in a better place, right? So you can perceive the first reason as being along these lines, right? And both of them, again, when they come together, they give better outcome, right? Now the second reason for the development of yoga, it is curiosity, right? So curiosity, again in the beginning of the sessions also I have elaborated on this thing, right? Curiosity is a very, very important reason for the development of yoga. Hello. Can you?
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Sorry, I'm late.
No worries. I'll just briefly tell you about what I have discussed so far, and then we will again come back to where I reached, right? So today we are talking about, no worries. Today we are talking about the origin of yoga, right? Why did this practice come into existence? And main thing being that we could have done multiple other things, but we have come into the practice of yoga, right? So we need to understand where this practice is coming from, what is the point of origination, right? So I divided the points of origination into two parts, right? One is your psychological reasoning, okay? So you can write origin of yoga, and then you can make two arrows, and you can write down first reason is the psychological reason, and second reason you can write down the mythological reasoning. So psychological and mythological, one on each side. And then in the psychological, you can divide it again into two parts. So psychological, again you can create two arrows and you can write down. First reasoning I will have to spell for you, so I will spell it. Second one you can write down as curiosity. Okay, so curiosity you can directly write down. And
Sumaji, can you explain that please, that last part? Sorry, I think I might get this. You can see me too.
Last, which part?
The last one you said is to put the arrow by this psychological.
Yeah, one is psychological. Okay, so origin of yoga on top, right? And then one is your psychological reason, like or origin. And then on the other side it's mythological.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got it.
Right.
Thank you.
And in psychological you have to further subdivide it into two parts. Okay. So there are two reasons behind the psychological, like in the psychological department as well for us. One is curiosity, all right. And the second one I will spell it for you. So it's Sukha Pravarti, SUKHA, Sukha. Pravarti is PRAVRITTI. Sukha Pravarti. And then you can, with Sukha Pravarti, English translation, you can write down enhancement of happiness. And with this only, so these two combined is one reason. You can write down and then I will spell the other one for you. So it's Dukkha Nivritti, DUKHA, Dukkha Nivritti, NIVRITTI, Dukkha Nivritti. Right, so I will just give you a brief because I have covered this one, the Sukha Pravarti Dukkha Nivritti, but just briefly. So yoga came into existence, like I have discussed before also. It came into existence because we wanted to enhance our happiness, right? So we are looking for something. If you are sitting here, you are looking to enhance the level of your happiness, looking for a more permanent source of happiness, right? Because it was generally observed that the happiness comes and goes, right? So we are not able to currently find a very permanent source of happiness, right? And just we don't need a permanent source of happiness or a better source of happiness. At the same time, we also want the suffering or the sadness to go down, right? So we want to create as much gap as is between both of them. So not only do I want to enhance my happiness, I also want my sadness to go down, right? Because I don't know, if I just say that I want to enhance my happiness, maybe my sadness, you know, what is attached with it is also enhancement of my suffering, right? So I want to create a good gap between both these things, right? So I have discussed this deeply, so maybe you can watch the recorded version. I have talked about it a lot, right? And second reason which I was explaining was the curiosity. So I have discussed this in the introductory class as well of philosophy, that we as human beings are very curious, right? So when we are just looking for the basic survival, this curiosity is at a very lower level, right? So we just want to get food, have shelter, right? So we want to have the basic needs fulfilled. But once the basic needs get fulfilled, the higher level of the mind gets triggered, right? So then when you have everything around you, you have all the basic necessities being fulfilled, you come to this questioning, why am I here, right? What am I doing here, right? Or some people go more deeply, they question who they are, or they question, what is their purpose, right? Why am I here, right? What am I doing here, right? So once the basic needs get fulfilled, the curiosity rises to another level, right? And when the curiosity rose to this level, in order to understand oneself, in order to understand the reasoning of being, right, then practices like yoga came into development. Why? Because now the need was felt, right? Now the things could not be answered that easily. And in fact, the answer of these things, it cannot be very easily observed also. Now the tools of observation have to change. So if I cannot see, my vision is not correct, I will go ahead and buy, specs, right? I will get my eye checked and I will look for the correct lens for me, and I will buy the specs. But what I'm trying to observe doesn't require this tool, right? Now what I'm trying to observe requires tools like meditation, right? Because those things cannot be observed through the senses, right? So these tools were developed in a set, and those set of practices were known as yoga, because one now didn't want to observe what was around them, they wanted to actually get a deeper understanding of them, their own selves, right? So this was the second reason for the development of yoga. So if you don't believe in any other power existing, because mythological is more about the belief, right? But if you don't even believe in that, you can generally see that there is some form of suffering in your life, and you can generally see you are curious, right? Your curiosity is at a high level, right? So these two reasonings can help you to understand the origin, why such a practice came into existence. Why not go and dance, right? You came here, so you were looking for something which only this form of practice can fulfill. Not a dancing class, not a Zumba class, not a swimming class, but a class of yoga, right? So these two became the major reasonings which human beings could comprehend, right? Initially this could be comprehended even at the conscious level. This sounds very logical, right? That this would be the reason for the origination of yoga. Now in the first point only I have talked of suffering, right? And there are three forms of suffering. So this is your task for today, okay? So all of your sufferings can be divided only in these three forms. So when you go about your day, tomorrow is your off, when you go about tomorrow, then you can see whatever you are struggling with, it will fall in one of these categories. So you can begin to categorize, okay, this is this type of suffering, this is this form of suffering, right? So first one is your physical suffering, and Sanskrit name for this is Adi Bhautik. So A-D-H-I, Adi Bhautik, B-H-A-U-T-I-K-A, Adi Bhautik. This is the physical suffering. Then your next one, the second one is Adi Devik. So A-D-H-I D-A-I-V-I-K-A, Adi Devik, right? These are two words, okay? So in this you can write down the divine kind of suffering, right? Or supernatural. And the third kind of suffering that you will experience in your life is the Adhyatmic, right? So again, this is one word only now. Adhyatmic is one word, A-D-H-Y. It's Y, all right? A-T-M-A-K-A. So I'll spell it once again in case there is any confusion. A-D-H-Y-A-T-M-I-C. 𝐻𝐸𝐴𝐷𝐻𝐸𝐴𝐷𝐻𝐸𝐴𝐷𝐻𝐸𝐴, Adhyatmic. Or you can in bracket write down, this is the internal suffering. Okay. So it is possible that one happens and the other one is triggered, right? But overall categorization is this only, right? So physical suffering, the first one, it has to do with the world around you, right? You exist in a physical world, right? So suppose you get in a conflict with someone, right? So there is some level of suffering that you experience in your life, right? So this is your Adi Bhautik suffering, right? Related to the 3D world that is around you. You interact with someone, you get in a conflict, you get a disease on your body, right? So your body is a physical like form of you, right? So on this, if something develops, then again it becomes a physical kind of suffering for you, right? So all the diseases, all the arguments, conflicts, if there is some inconvenience caused because of the external world, right, that comes under the physical suffering, right? So most of the times we do experience a lot of physical suffering. In fact, if somebody is doing something, we get immediately impacted by it, right? It causes some kind of effect on us, right? Then the second one is the Adi Bhautik. So now sometimes what happens is that nature, like COVID, the best example is COVID, right? Or earthquakes, right? Things like these which are totally out of our control, right? Which are totally, there is no control that you have over these things, and they are driven by the environment that you are in, right? And these are like not created by someone, right? They're just there as a, nature expressing itself, you can say, right? So when the earthquake comes, we suffer, right? A lot of people, where the earthquake comes or the flood comes, if there is a hurricane, there's a lot of destruction and a lot of suffering that is caused because of it, right? So now the source of your suffering has shifted from just the people around you or the environment, basically where you are existing, or your own body, to something which is totally out of your control, right? Whenever nature will decide, like nature decided 2 years ago, now I am not going to take what human beings are doing, COVID came in, right? So till date, we are still looking for solutions. We have no control over it. We can just develop a vaccine against it, right? So this kind of suffering, and so many people suffered because of COVID on so many levels. This kind of suffering is more of a supernatural suffering, right? It's showing up in the physical world, yes, but it is completely out of our control, right? So this is your second form of suffering. And then the third one, so this is less common. These days I would say this is quite common, but earlier we would have categorized it as being less common, right? And the third kind of suffering is the Adhyatmic or internal suffering, right? So suppose you are in a situation, there are 10 people around you, right? So that same thing happened, but each one of you will take something different out of that same incident, right? So maybe somebody will be sad, somebody might be happy also, right, out of that same thing. So what is changing the the same thing happened, but what is causing the suffering now is how I am interpreting it, right? So internal kind of suffering, depression showing up in today's world, right? Stress, any kind of psychological disorders that are showing up, they are because the same situation is happening. Everybody around them is experiencing that same thing, but what is happening to us, what is happening to you or the other person is totally up to you, right? Because the training of the mind is done in a particular way. So from the same situation you are perceiving something different, right? So this kind of suffering, when you are stuck in the internal conflict, you are not able to find, mind is going some other way, heart is going some other way. So most of the people who go through depression, they don't know they are going through depression. right? Unless and until they actually go and get diagnosed. They just think that it's like normal, it's a conflict that is going within them. But this is actually a big source of suffering, right? So Adhyatmic Dukh, even though not that it's not observable that easily, it is actually very common, right? And again, Adhyatmic Dukh comes in when your basic necessities are again fulfilled, right? Because that is when otherwise you would just be concerned that where will I get the next meal from, right? But then again, when you get the time, the space where the higher faculty of the mind can start working, so you see, oh, I have less than the other person, right? So then the suffering begins to develop, right? So these are the three forms of suffering. They can be interconnected. Maybe something you have a conflict with someone, so it is Adi Bhautik, right? But then internally how you process it, it can cause you much more harm, right? If you deepen that thing, if you just keep going in circles about that thought. So easily they transmit from one to the other, right? Again, external suffering can take place and then it can become a trigger for your internal suffering, right? So what this thing will do, the categorization of the three sufferings, what this will do is, first thing, when you put a particular name on it, right, you will immediately feel a sense of detachment. So suppose you are lost in emotion when you are in a conflict with someone, right? It is very common, it happens. So you are lost in the emotion, right? And then suddenly you remember, oh, this is Adi Bhautik Dukh, right? So what happens? For a few seconds you disconnect with the emotion, right? And if you ever see, if somebody is angry and the phone rings, their just attention is diverted to the ringing phone. Then when they even if they don't pick up the phone, they just put it on silent. In those few moments only, they will never be able to return back to the level of anger that they were at, right? So the intensity of the emotion at that point of time, when you begin to categorize, it reduces and the sense of awareness begins to come in. Oh, this is supposed to be there, everybody is suffering, right? So let me go and practice yoga. Maybe after a few times this thing will start coming in, or oh, let me come to my breathing, let me observe how I am breathing, right? So this, just if you remember sometimes, so this will come up more and more, right, eventually, but initially you will have to make some effort. But if you begin to do this, you will see this thing, right? The intensity of the emotion reduces, the intensity of the anger, the jealousy, hatred, anything, it reduces, and as a result, you only, you punish yourself when you go into such an extreme emotion, right? So you only get saved somewhere. So this activity will not only help you to categorize or understand how deeply suffering is a part of your life, it will also help you to, come out of it. It's just a very simple trick or tactic, right? As soon as you recognize it, as soon as you categorize it, you will somewhere begin to come out of it, right? So you can again try this experiment. You have today, you have tomorrow, right? On Monday I will give you more tricks for other things, right? So then you can work on those, right? And yeah, so these are three forms of our sufferings, right? Now let's come to the mythological reasoning, right? So for mythology, of course, your mind has to be more open, right? So Lord Shiv, if you have not seen the image, you can Google it, or if you have not heard the name also, I am here to tell you that if you ever read any authentic yogic text, he is paid respect to, right? He is considered to be the first yogi, the one who practiced all forms of yoga, and then he passed down the understanding of yoga to humanity, right? So Lord Shiv, Shiva, in English you add an A, so Shiva. He is considered to be the source of origination of yoga, right? And like I said, he practiced also, and because he practiced so many forms of yoga, he was able to gain the experience and then pass them down, right? So there is a very, I will give you a very short story, right? There is a story around this also. So Lord Shiv, right, his wife Parvati ji, so you don't need to know all the names, but just a brief understanding. So his wife Parvati ji, she became his first student. Okay, so in the house they were husband and wife, and when they went for their teachings they were student and teacher, right? So now where they were like living in the mountains, and there was a river flowing, right? So that is where their classes used to take place, right? So the river was flowing by the side, and both of them were having the session understanding of yoga. So in ancient times, like right now you have a proper schedule, philosophy 11 to 12, then therapy. So like this, the schedule wasn't divided in earlier times, right? So when the guru started speaking, they used to speak at length. Sometimes it used to go on for hours and hours, sometimes it was a very short discourse, but it used to depend, right? So now this very time, Lord Shiv, he wanted to, pass down the knowledge of yoga to Parvati ji, and it is quite elaborate in its nature. So as he started speaking the class, like when the class began, he started speaking, and he spoke for a lot of hours that day. It so happened, right? So when he was doing this thing, Parvati ji was sitting. Now the student, like you guys, maybe you can take a break wherever you are, right? You can turn the video off, you can go take a break, come back, right? So in ancient times, again, the student, the responsibility of the student was to just sit and listen. They couldn't, interrupt the teacher in between, right? So now what happened was, when this thing happened, that the transmission of knowledge started taking place, Parvati ji, she was very sleepy, right, after some time. So she, like sometimes you also while sitting you can take a nap. So she also while sitting, she just took a nap, right? So now the yogi, the yogi's voice is very, very capturing. So, the animals, everything around them, everything knows that the yogi has arrived, right? So now, because they were sitting by the river, a fish, heard his sound and was immediately attracted towards the source of the voice. So she reached the point, the corner in the river where they were having their session, right? So now she was there from the beginning till the end, right? So in between she observed that Parvati ji had slept, right? So now, generally when we talk to someone and we just want to assure that we are listening, right? So we just, add a little bit of right? So we nod, we add a little bit of So Parvati ji was also constantly, doing this thing in order to just assure him that she is listening, right? And when the teacher goes into a state of talking, so the teacher, goes into that state, right? So he was also just trusting the fact that when she is reassuring him, she is listening. But in between she fell asleep, right? So now the fish noticed this thing, right? So instead of Parvati ji saying the fish started saying this thing as a proxy, you can say, right? So what happened was, thankfully, by the time Lord Shiv, he was about to end all of the information, Parvati ji woke up, right? So at the end, like I ask you guys, are there any questions or any doubts? So Shiv ji, also asked her that you understood everything, no? Whatever I was telling you. So at that point of time, Parvati ji, she admitted that, I slept in between, right? It was very long, it was a very long session, and I fell asleep in between, right? So Lord Shiv, he became very curious. He was like, where did the sound come from then? So suddenly he observed that there was a fish, right, on the river, and she was listening, right? So now there is one more very, in ancient times there was a very important rule, right, that the teacher had to give the permission to take the knowledge, right? So now the fish, even though was there, hadn't taken the knowledge of Lord Shiv to attain this information, right? So but she had acquired all of the information, right? So now Lord Shiv, he gave her a blessing, and then he also gave her a punishment for not taking the permission, right? So the blessing was this, that this fish, she will, have a human body, right, in the upcoming life, and will pass down all of the knowledge of yoga because she had acquired it all, right? And the punishment that Lord Shiv, he gave was that when she will need it most in her human life, right, she will forget this information, right? So there was this very famous yogi by the name of Matsendranath. So again, you don't need to know the names, it's just a story, you can enjoy it, right? So there is a very famous yogi by the name of Matsendranath, and he actually, became a very big propagator of yoga in general. In his time, he passed down the knowledge of yoga to a lot of people. But exactly that thing happened. When he needed this information the most in his life, he forgot the information, right? So this entire story, just how yoga, came to humanity, right? There are other stories also around it. Shivji, he taught 7 sages the yoga, the knowledge of yoga, and then they passed down to humanity. They went to different parts of the world and spread the entire knowledge. So there are so many stories around the origin of yoga and how it came to us, and they are very interesting. So if you like stories, if you like mythology, you can definitely go ahead and look for more stories, and stories are very entertaining, right? So why not? So you guys can do your own research as well. So these 2 things are considered to be the points of origination of yoga, and this will actually help you in the upcoming classes also, because you need to know where what you are practicing is coming from, right? And tomorrow we will talk about on Monday we will talk about the development history of yoga, why yoga is practiced in this way today and how it was practiced earlier. So when we cover that topic, you will be able to understand. I will connect each and everything to be able to understand why yoga is practiced in this form today, right? So any questions or doubts, queries from our session today?
No, I'm just it's so interested, so I want to learn more about it.
Yeah, there are a lot of stories, and I will definitely share more stories in the upcoming classes. So whatever I can cue in, I will.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you so much, Sumaji.
No worries, no worries. So let's end our session, right? We'll just chant the mantra and close the session for today. So sit comfortably, keeping the back and neck straight. Take a deep inhalation for Om. We'll chant the Shanti Mantra. Sarve bhavantu sukhinah. Sarve santu niramaya. Sarve bhadrani pashyantu. Ma kaschit dukhabhag bhavet. Ma kaschit dukhabhag bhavet. Take a deep breath in for Om. Shanti, Feel the vibrations. Join your palms together and gently bow down. Just a few seconds for a sense of gratitude. And now rub your palms together. Keep them on the eyes. Very slowly, while blinking and looking at your palms, begin to open up your eyes, coming back with a big smile. Om Shanti and Namaste. Happy weekend. Enjoy your weekend, and I will see you on Monday. Yeah, great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.